What would you do if you saw someone crossing a line so brazen, so disrespectful? It left you frozen for a moment, and then furious beyond reason. Imagine sitting in a quiet, unassuming diner, the smell of frying bacon and coffee hanging in the air, the morning sunlight casting golden stripes across the worn linoleum. And then, suddenly, a biker, loud, reckless, completely unaware of the lives around him, shoves an 81-year-old man. Not just any man, but a veteran. A man who has seen more danger, more sacrifice, than most of us could even imagine. The diner goes silent. Cups pause mid-air, eyes widen, whispers ripple like a startled flock. And yet, the man, stoic, weathered, a life etched into every line of his face, doesn't immediately react. He doesn't shout. He doesn't yell. He simply rises, a quiet storm brewing in his calm eyes. There's history there, unspoken, a life of discipline and courage that refuses to be mocked. But the question lingers: can arrogance, recklessness, and brute force truly stand against a lifetime of honor and training? In 22 minutes, a quiet diner would witness the ripple of consequences that no one inside could have predicted. A son would arrive, a storm in human form, armed not with anger, but with experience forged in the army. This is not just a story of confrontation. It's a lesson in respect, patience, and the power of the ties that bind a family together when injustice crosses the line. The diner sat on the corner of a quiet suburban street, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered faintly, humming a soft, electric lullaby. Outside, the morning was crisp, the kind of early fall chill that made your breath visible and lingered in little clouds before fading. A few leaves skittered across the asphalt, pushed by a light wind that carried the distant hum of traffic, muffled but constant, like a heartbeat under the calm of the city. Inside, the atmosphere was deceptively ordinary. Vinyl booths lined the walls, their red cushions slightly cracked from decades of use. The linoleum floor, speckled with crumbs and coffee stains, bore silent witness to countless mornings like this one. The smell of sizzling bacon mixed with strong, bitter coffee, grounding the scene in a comforting, familiar rhythm. The jukebox in the corner played soft, old tunes, the kind that made you want to sink into the leather of the chair and forget the world outside. But beneath the ordinary, there was tension. Patrons sat quietly, sipping coffee, reading newspapers, exchanging polite nods, none of them knowing that the calm they took for granted was about to fracture. The air felt heavier than it should, as if the room itself sensed the approach of something unwelcome. Shadows from the morning sun stretched long across the tables, falling like silent warnings, cutting through the soft hum of conversation. Near the counter, an 81-year-old veteran sat alone, his posture straight despite his age, a weathered cap resting in his lap. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the room occasionally, not with suspicion, but with a quiet awareness, like a man who had seen enough of the world to notice when something was off. Every creak of a chair, every clink of a coffee cup, seemed amplified in the hush that had settled around him. Outside, a motorcycle growled in the distance, a sound out of place, jarring against the calm morning. The rumble drew the attention of a few patrons, but most shrugged it off, assuming it was just another rider passing through. Yet, the veteran's eyes narrowed slightly, the calm before the storm reflected in their steady gaze. Something was coming. Something that would disturb the fragile balance of this ordinary day. In this quiet diner, with sunlight painting the room in streaks of gold and shadows creeping in from the corners, the stage was set. An ordinary morning on the surface, but beneath it, tension simmered, waiting for a spark. A confrontation that would test respect, courage, and the bonds of family in ways no one yet imagined. At the counter, the veteran stirred his coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into his hands. Every movement carried a measured precision, the result of decades spent in discipline and routine. His eyes, a sharp steel gray, followed each subtle motion in the diner, the waitress sliding plates along the tables, the quiet chatter between patrons, the glint of sunlight off a fork. There was a calm authority in his presence, not demanding attention, but naturally commanding it. People noticed him, even if they didn't consciously realize it. This was a man who had faced chaos and walked through it with a steady heart. Across the room, the biker made his entrance, a stark contrast to the composed stillness of the veteran. Black leather jacket creaking, boots thudding against the floor, he carried an air of arrogance that seemed to push the calm morning aside. His laugh was loud, brash, a sound meant to dominate space rather than fill it. He didn't look around. The diner existed solely as an obstacle in his path, a stage for his recklessness. A few patrons flinched as he swaggered past, but the veteran remained still, observing, unshaken. Behind the counter, the waitress moved with practiced efficiency. She was young, but her movements were confident, her tone polite yet firm when interacting with patrons. She noticed the tension forming the moment the biker's presence clashed with the veteran's quiet authority. Her eyes flicked between them, a subtle warning in the lift of an eyebrow, as if sensing the storm before it arrived. Then there was the son, though not yet in the diner. He was the silent shadow waiting beyond the periphery. A man shaped by military rigor, his stance disciplined even when walking down the street, his eyes scanning with trained precision. He carried an aura of readiness, a quiet assurance that action, when necessary, would arrive without hesitation. Though absent from the immediate scene, the weight of his presence was felt in the narrative of the morning, a force poised to restore balance. Even the biker, for all his bluster, reacted unconsciously to the veteran's gaze. There was a flicker of hesitation, a subtle adjustment in posture, though pride masked it. It was the first sign that authority need not shout to be recognized. Each character occupied the diner like pieces on a chessboard, their roles unfolding without explanation, their dynamics established through the tension in glances, the rhythm of movements, and the unspoken history each carried. By the time the first interaction escalated, the audience already knew who held restraint, who wielded arrogance, and who would arrive to tip the scales of power. The diner was no longer just a setting. It had become a stage where every glance, every subtle action, would speak louder than words, revealing character, courage, and the brewing storm about to erupt. The diner's hum of routine began to fracture the moment the biker's boot scuffed against the edge of the veteran's booth. He didn't apologize. He didn't even notice. He leaned over the counter, grinning at the waitress in a way that was more challenge than charm. And then, without warning, his hand connected with the veteran's shoulder. Light at first, but sharp enough to make the old man flinch. A hush fell over the room. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. A fork slid slightly from a plate. The biker laughed, loud and unrestrained, clearly expecting some form of reaction. But the veteran remained seated, his back perfectly straight, his hands resting calmly on the table. Not frozen, he was calculating, assessing. Every twitch, every shift of the biker's weight, catalogued like moves in a chess game. "You should watch where you're standing, old man," the biker said, his grin widening, his voice dripping arrogance. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of dominance, the kind of man who believed intimidation could replace respect. The veteran's reply was a slow, deliberate exhale, followed by a glance that could cut steel. "I've watched the world, son, and I've learned a thing or two about men like you." His voice was soft, almost conversational, yet carried a weight that made the biker pause ever so slightly. It was enough. Just a flicker in the biker's bravado. But it didn't last. The biker shoved him, this time harder, his palm against the veteran's chest, a mockery of force. Time seemed to stretch for a heartbeat. Patrons leaned back, instinctively sensing the line being crossed. The veteran rose from the booth, not with anger, but with a measured dignity. His hands moved slowly, intentionally, maintaining control of the situation, yet signaling that the line had been breached. The waitress, voice steady but tense, stepped between them. "Hey, that's enough. You're going too far." The biker scoffed, backing her hand away with a smirk, ready to escalate. "Mind your own business, girl." The veteran's eyes didn't leave him. There was no shout, no flailing fists, just a presence that demanded attention. And then, almost imperceptibly, he straightened, his frame taller despite age, a subtle warning that the game had changed. Every muscle, every posture, spoke restraint mixed with readiness. For a moment, the diner hung in suspended tension. The quiet before the storm, before consequences rippled outward. Patrons sensed it, The waitress braced herself, and the biker, for the first time, felt the weight of misjudgment. In that silent standoff, the first domino fell. This wasn't just a shove anymore. This was the spark, a breach of respect that could not go unanswered. And somewhere beyond the diner, a son walked closer, a force honed by years of training, ready to tip the balance in ways the biker couldn't yet imagine. The morning light caught the veteran's eyes, cold and unyielding. The tension didn't break yet, but it had shifted irrevocably. Something had begun, and the diner, once ordinary, would never be the same again. The diner no longer felt ordinary. Each chair, each plate, each muted hum of conversation had transformed into a stage where unseen forces clashed quietly but with immense gravity. The biker, still leaning against the edge of the counter, radiated arrogance, his chest puffed, a grin plastered across his face as if the world belonged solely to him. But for the first time, that grin flickered, a microsecond revealing the question. Had he misjudged the man in front of him? The veteran remained seated, unwavering. Every movement deliberate, every breath controlled. He did not rise to the bait of shouting or theatrics. Instead, he allowed his presence alone to communicate what words could not. Authority does not scream. It doesn't demand attention. Authority waits, measured and patient, and that patience, ironically, was what made it terrifying. Patrons felt it instinctively, some leaning forward in anxious curiosity, others sinking back in quiet realization that something far larger than themselves was unfolding. "You think you can intimidate me," the veteran said, his voice low but carrying across the diner. "Because you can push, because you can scare, but respect isn't earned with force." The biker laughed, a sharp, clipped sound, but there was tension now in his stance. His fists twitched, not from fear, but from the ego bruised by recognition that his dominance was not absolute. This was not the reaction he anticipated. He had expected a quick surge of fear, a submission that would validate every reckless assumption he had built around his swagger. And instead, he found calm, deliberate resistance. The waitress, sensing the shift, kept her distance but never looked away. Her hand hovered near the veteran's chair, a silent acknowledgement of support, a subtle reminder that chaos could be tempered without confrontation. She had witnessed plenty of displays of ego and force, but there was a difference here. Integrity held its ground, unshakable, and it made arrogance stumble. The biker's voice rose, sharper now, tinged with frustration. "Old man, you don't know who you're messing with." The veteran finally rose from his seat, slow and precise, but without aggression. Each step was deliberate. His body language radiated control, yet he made no move to strike, no challenge to escalate. "I know exactly who I'm messing with. A man who thinks power comes from fear, not from accountability. And I know what that looks like in the world, and it's not impressive." For the first time, the biker's bravado wavered. His hands dropped slightly, his jaw tightening, because the simple act of calm authority, a life forged in discipline and tested in war, was unraveling the illusion he had built around his persona. Power is often mistaken for volume, for aggression. But here, power was quiet, precise, undeniable. The diner seemed to exhale, the tension spreading like ripples across a still pond. Patrons watched, caught in the moral gravity of the scene. Each small gesture of the veteran, the subtle lift of an eyebrow, the measured cadence of speech, the unyielding stare, revealed layers of integrity and accountability. Each hesitant shift of the biker's weight betrayed ego slowly confronting consequence. And then came the subtle recognition. The real power was not in anger, not in force, not in reckless action. It was in restraint, in moral authority, in the ability to remain composed while others fumbled with their impulses. The biker's aggression had been exposed, his control a fragile facade. Outside, the distant rumble of an engine signaled another presence, unseen but imminent. The son, trained, prepared, and disciplined, approached, not with fury, but with the quiet inevitability of consequence. In that instant, the diner became more than a room. It became a crucible where ego, integrity, authority, and accountability collided, revealing who truly commanded respect. The biker shifted again, this time unconsciously stepping back, as if sensing the true scale of what had begun. And the veteran, standing taller despite his years, allowed a small nod toward the waitress, a silent acknowledgement of support, of shared understanding, of the quiet reinforcement of order over chaos. In this delicate escalation, the confrontation evolved. No fists flew, no sirens sounded, yet the lesson was profound. Power is not in the shove, the shout, or the pretense of dominance. Power is in the stillness that makes others reconsider their actions, in the moral authority that exposes arrogance, in the integrity that refuses to be shaken by momentary chaos. The diner, once ordinary, had become a theater of reflection, where even the most brazen ego could not escape the inevitability of accountability. And so, the stage was set. The biker's bravado had been tested, the veteran's composure revealed, and the son's arrival, unseen but inevitable, would ensure that justice, discipline, and family loyalty completed the story. In the quiet aftermath of tension, the room seemed to breathe again, but none would forget the demonstration that true authority is quiet, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The diner's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly at first. The biker, still bristling with defiance, felt a subtle change in the air, a weight he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the veteran's words, not exactly, but the calm precision in his stance, the unshakable steadiness in his gaze. Every muscle, every breath, spoke of experience, of decades forged in situations far more dangerous than a momentary act of arrogance. Then, in a quiet, deliberate movement, the veteran reached for his coat. Not aggressively, not with threat, but with purpose. The room held its collective breath. Patrons leaned forward instinctively, sensing that the scales of power were about to tip, yet not fully understanding how. The biker scoffed, attempting to mask unease with laughter, but it was thinner this time, forced, unconvincing. "You think this is a game," the veteran said, voice calm, deliberate. "But respect isn't optional. It's earned, and when you cross the line, consequences follow. Always." For the first time, the biker's defiance faltered. A flicker of doubt passed through his eyes. He realized, in that instant, that control is not measured by loud gestures or threats. It is measured by restraint, by the ability to remain composed when others seek to provoke. He had been playing at power, but he had underestimated the quiet strength in front of him. And then, in the same slow, deliberate manner, the veteran's son entered the diner. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. His presence alone, disciplined, confident, and unyielding, added a new layer of inevitability to the unfolding drama. The biker felt it immediately, an unspoken pressure pressing down, a reminder that some actions have consequences far beyond what arrogance can imagine. The room, once suspended in tension, now crystallized into clarity. The biker's ego shrank under the weight of quiet authority. He was confronted not by aggression, but by the undeniable truth of experience, moral integrity, and familial strength. In that single moment, the dynamic shifted. Control no longer belonged to the loudest or the boldest. It belonged to those who understood honor, patience, and the power of measured action. The diner had witnessed not a confrontation, but a lesson. True strength is silent, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. And with that realization, the first spark of change ignited, the beginning of accountability, the moment when arrogance met the immovable force of quiet, unwavering resolve. The diner was quiet now, but the air still carried the weight of what had transpired. Patrons returned to their routines, but their glances lingered on the veteran and his son, a silent acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The biker, once brimming with bluster, sat slumped in a booth near the corner, his leather jacket wrinkled, helmet in hand, and pride visibly deflated. The confrontation had ended, not with fists or screams, but with the immutable clarity of accountability. Outside, the hum of engines and passing cars reminded everyone that life moved forward, indifferent to human drama, yet the lesson remained indelibly marked in the minds of those who had watched. The veteran sat once more, the weight of his years evident in the slow adjustment of his posture, but his gaze remained steady. His son, disciplined and composed, lingered nearby, a silent sentinel, the unspoken promise of support and protection underscored in every controlled breath. No one cheered. No one shouted. There was no triumph in the sense of spectacle. Yet victory, subtle and profound, radiated through the room. The biker's arrogance had been exposed, but more than that, he had been confronted by a quiet, undeniable truth. Force and bluster cannot override integrity and experience. The resolution did not require revenge, because accountability itself had arrived, deliberate and inevitable. The waitress, who had witnessed the entire sequence unfold, moved closer to the veteran, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of respect and relief. For showing all of us what it means to stand firm." He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and sipped his coffee. The lesson had been delivered without spectacle, without theatrics, just the weight of lived experience, moral authority, and measured response. The biker left soon after, quieter than he had arrived, the lessons of the morning etched into his expression. He did not apologize, not yet, but the defiance had been broken. And that, in itself, was enough. Accountability often arrives quietly, without fanfare, but it is as irreversible as time. In the following days, the story of the diner spread, not as a tale of violence, but as a story of quiet power, moral clarity, and integrity. The veteran returned to his routine, unshaken, yet strengthened by the knowledge that his actions had made a difference. His son, too, carried the experience forward, understanding that true strength lies in calm, deliberate action, and the courage to uphold principles even when provoked. The diner resumed its ordinary rhythm, yet nothing within its walls, or in the hearts of those who witnessed the encounter, was quite the same again. Justice had been served, not in anger, but in restraint. Respect had been restored, and a quiet victory, moral, unassailable, and profoundly human, had been achieved. In the quiet aftermath, the diner returned to its routine, but the echoes of that morning lingered. Not in the clatter of plates or the hum of conversation, but in the unspoken understanding that strength is not measured by force, volume, or intimidation. True authority is patient, deliberate, and grounded in integrity. It doesn't need to prove itself through aggression. It exists quietly, inevitably, and with undeniable weight. The veteran's calm defiance had exposed arrogance, his composure had commanded respect, and his son's measured presence had reminded the world that accountability is never absent when discipline guides action. The biker's bluster had been confronted, not through revenge, but through the quiet power of moral clarity. In life, the strongest victories are often the ones without spectacle. They are felt in reflection, recognized in restraint, and carried forward in principle. Because in the end, respect is earned not by the fear you inspire, but by the integrity you embody. Authority without empathy isn't leadership, it's just noise. And courage without discipline is only chaos waiting to be tamed.